Have you ever really thought about the story behind your wool sweater? I don't just mean where it was made, but its actual journey through the Earth's carbon cycle. Well, it turns out that story is way more complex and honestly, a lot more surprising than you might think. So let's just get right to it. Is that cozy wool sweater of yours a problem for the climate? If you look at a lot of environmental rating systems, the answer they'd give you is a big, fat yes. You'll often see wool ranked as even worse for the planet than synthetics like polyester. But is that really the whole story? To figure this out, we first need to understand why wool has gotten such a bad rap. I mean, where does this reputation even come from? For years, the science on this seemed pretty straightforward. Study after study concluded that wool has a really high carbon footprint, and the main villain in this story, methane, specifically the methane that sheep release when they burp. Now, all those studies use a standard tool called a life cycle assessment, or an LCA. Think of it like this. It's basically an environmental accounting system. It adds up all the impacts of a product from the very beginning, the cradle, all the way to when you throw it out, the grave. And this is the method everyone uses. It's the global gold standard. But here's where the plot thickens. What if that standard, gold standard accounting method has been accidentally leaving out a massive piece of the puzzle? A piece that, could change the entire equation. You see, the real issue here is that these assessments were basically built for factories, not for farms. They're fantastic at tracking emissions coming out of a smokestack, but they totally miss the fact that the carbon in something like wool isn't new carbon. It's part of a living, breathing, natural cycle. And this leads us to what is honestly the most important idea in this whole explainer. Not all carbon is created equal. There are two fundamentally different kinds, and telling them apart, well, it changes everything. On one side, you've got biogenic carbon. This is the carbon that's already in the air, in the plants, in the animals. It's part of a fast, natural cycle. Think of it like a revolving door. On the other side, you have fossil carbon. This is ancient carbon that's been locked underground for millions of years. When we burn fossil fuels, we're adding new carbon to the atmosphere that wasn't there before. And that's what throws the system out of balance. Biogenic carbon just moves around. Fossil carbon adds to the pile. Okay, so check this out. This diagram shows you that biogenic cycle in action. Carbon dioxide gets pulled out of the air by grass. A sheep comes along and eats that grass. That carbon then just flows through the sheep and goes right back into the ecosystem through breathing, manure, and yes, even those famous methane burps. See? It's a closed, continuous loop. And here's the really important part. The official science is finally catching up. There's a new international standard, ISO 14067, that now specifically says you have to account for this biogenic carbon cycle. So this isn't some fringe idea, you guys. This is the new, globally accepted, and frankly, much more accurate way to do things. So okay, if we use this new, better way of thinking, where does all the carbon that a sheep eats actually go? Let's follow the carbon. Alright, so this chart might look a little complicated, but it's super cool. It's from a landmark Australian study, and it shows us exactly where every bit of carbon goes. It's called a Sankey diagram, and basically, the thicker the line, the more carbon is flowing there. We can follow it all the way from the grass the sheep eat on the left to all the different places it ends up on the right. And what they found is, well, it's pretty stunning. Look where most of the carbon goes. The biggest chunk, by far, isn't emissions. It's manure. Over 54% of the carbon. And those methane emissions we're always hearing about? Just 5.2% of the total carbon the sheep cook in. That's it. The real takeaway here is that most of the carbon is simply returned to the soil. Okay, so this is where it all comes together. This is the big reveal. What happens when you recalculate wool's carbon footprint, but this time you actually include the entire biogenic cycle? Now, before they dropped the big bombshell, the researchers did something really smart. They ran their new model the old way, only counting the emissions. And what they find? Their result was almost identical to the average from all those previous studies. So that proves their math is solid. They're starting from the exact same place as everyone else. But now, just watch what happens when they factor in the biogenic cycle. The moment you start counting the carbon that goes back into the soil for manure, the footprint doesn't just get smaller, it completely collapses. And you can see right here, the final number is all about how much of that carbon-rich manure actually stays in the soil. And this is the part that is just absolutely mind-blowing. If farmers use good land management practices that keep that carbon in the soil, wool production can literally flip from being a carbon source to a net carbon sink. can actually help pull more carbon out of the atmosphere than it puts in. Let's put a number on that. The study found that with good land management, meaning about 2/3 of the manure's carbon stays in the soil, the net carbon footprint dropped by 102%. It didn't just go down to zero, it went past zero. It became carbon negative. This is a massive finding. And listen, this isn't just about wool. This changes the game for all natural fibers. It's a whole new way of looking at things. And in fact, a different recent study on cotton found the exact same thing. Just look at this quote. Once they included biogenic carbon, they saw a potential reduction of up to 105% of the emissions for cotton. So we're seeing the same pattern. This is a huge deal for the entire natural materials industry. So what's the bottom line here? What should you remember? First, biogenic carbon cycles, but fossil carbon piles up. Second, where your emissions come from matters just as much as how much there is. Third, good farming can actually be a powerful climate solution, turning a carbon source into a sink. And finally, this completely changes how we should be comparing natural materials to synthetics. So that leaves us with one final, really big question to chew on. If we actually start accounting for the entire living cycle of natural products instead of just one tiny piece of it, what does sustainable really even mean? The answer might be a whole lot different than what we've been told.